Hey, welcome back to Pastoral Apologetics. My name is Bob Franquiz, and I am excited to talk about this question. And this isn't a question that I've been asked. It's a question that I want you to think about. And that is, why was Judaism divided at the time of Jesus? Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, because remember, when the law was given at the time of Moses, Israel was united. At the time of the conquest of the land, Israel was united. When the monarchy began, Israel was united. Eventually, the nation split. But theologically, those who worshiped Yahweh, those who worshiped God, were united until the time of the exile. They come back, still united, until something happens. Until Alexander the Great and the rise of Hellenism. Now, if you're not familiar with it, Hellenism is a word that essentially means Greek culture. And Judaism was divided basically in response to how Greek culture was impacting Judaism and impacting Jewish culture. And so the descent into Greek culture begins about 200 years before the Roman occupation of Israel that we read about in the New Testament. It starts at the world had been swept by Alexander the Great. After Alexander dies, he had conquered the known world. He had spread Greek culture, which was his goal. Throughout the known world, he was going to spread Greek culture among the barbarians, which were any culture that wasn't Greek. And so, as Jewish leaders saw the impact of Greek culture in Jewish life, they essentially divided on how they were going to deal with it. And this led to what we see in the New Testament, and that is three different factions of religious groups. And so all of it had to do with dealing with Greek culture. One group would embrace Greek culture, one group would reject Greek culture or fight against Greek culture, and then the other just became total isolationists and to isolate themselves from pretty much all culture. Now, the challenge that you have is that you have Greek culture beginning to infect Jewish life with values that were contrary to what was found in the Torah. On top of that, you have an emerging generation which is speaking primarily Greek and later Latin, and they needed a copy of the scriptures for them to read. So around 200 BC, the Septuagint is created, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. By the way, most of the quotations in the New Testament of the Old Testament are actually taken from the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And so the rise of these three groups, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and a group that is not mentioned specifically in the New Testament, but were there, this group called the Essenes, were all a response to the influence of Greek culture and how to be faithfully Jewish in an increasingly secular society. So the Pharisees said that they were going to be righteous by strict keeping of the law. And they not only was it strict keeping of the law, but strict application of the law. Now, Jesus had much in common with the theology of the Pharisees. The error of the Pharisees, and where Jesus had a lot of conflict with them, was not in the desire to keep the law. It was in the Pharisees' decision to give greater weight to tradition than to the scriptures themselves. Now, the Sadducees were another group. They have no writings that have survived antiquity, so everything that we know about them comes from two places: the New Testament and the Jewish historian Josephus, who worked for the Romans. And based on what we know about the Sadducees, they would have not categorized themselves as self-righteous or legalistic. Instead, they really embraced Greek culture. And all of the sacrifices and the temple was controlled by Sadducees, because virtually all the priests were Sadducees. But they were, it could be argued that they were very liberal in their theology, very liberal in their practice. Many Sadducees practice a form of what's called syncretism, which is where they were trying to blend faiths And so they identified Yahweh with the Most High God of Hellenism, which many construed as hypocrisy and compromise. So finally, there's a group called the Essenes. And the Essenes were a Jewish group that separated themselves from society and are identified with a group that's called the Qumran community. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. They were the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this is a group that they did not try to transform Judaism from within. They just withdrew to the desert. They rejected the temple. They rejected sacrificing at the temple, and instead they performed their own sacrifices. And the Essenes did not represent a majority view of the temple in the first century. And according to their numbers, based on Josephus, there was about 4,000 of them. But once again, in short, the reason that Judaism was split, the reason why people are always asking Jesus questions in the Gospels, is because they're trying to figure out, where did Jesus land? And because all of these groups were trying to figure out, how do we remain Jewish in an increasingly Greco-Roman world? And so they were asking questions to figure out, hey, what camp do you fall in? When they would ask Jesus questions to see where he stood on Greek culture, where he stood on the interpretations of the law, for them to remain Jewish. Of course, Jesus was coming for totally different reasons. It was not about reforming Judaism. It was about dealing with sin. It was about his death and resurrection and transforming humanity. And so, hope this has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, keep reading.